Well, here we are again. Another month's rolled around. It's your chance to send in an email and get me to answer it. It's our local Q&A, but apparently it's got developed into, you know what happens when you get a bit more involved and you get a few more people coming up with ideas? They've decided to give me this title of What's the Buzz? So, if you're Googling What's the Buzz, hell, I might pop up on your internet feed. So our first email comes from Callahan Melinda, and they got to ask 2 questions, which is kind of groovy. What is your favourite thing about beekeeping? Well, that's a very interesting thing. I think my favourite thing about beekeeping is actually when I'm in the bee box and I'm not thinking about too much else and I'm just checking, and my favourite time is when I check the brood pattern and the queen's been laying nicely and there's all the really lovely little white larvae and things are all looking good in there and all the frames are full of bees. And I think, wow, it's going to be a good season. Because the one thing weird about agriculture is we're always looking on to what's going to be and not necessarily getting too fussed about what was. And the other part of that question is, what is my least favourite part about beekeeping? I think the least favourite part about beekeeping for me would have to be sticky handles. There is no end of excitement in our household of the fact that I've got honey stuck somewhere that it shouldn't be. And I managed to traipse the stuff all over the house and upstairs, downstairs. But the upside to that is the wife starts helping me do some extracting now. And every now and then, I'm not really sure I blame her for the honey on the handles, but I'm pretty sure it's me. But anyway, that's probably the most awkward thing about honey. It just seems to end up everywhere where you don't want it to be. Young Deborah's written in a question. And I was just having a look at a bit of research and figuring things out. And did you know that Deborah was a prophetess back in the days of Israel? So, and apparently, a part of that means that Deborah actually, Deborah actually means bees, or a bee. How cool is that? So you're in the right thing if you're looking after bees. You got the right name. It's amazing. Anyway, I digress. The question is, I might read this out because it's a pretty long question. Just wondering if you have an opinion on whether we should dip or brush the frames with melted wax. Or is it okay to leave them without? Does the waxing of the frames make it easier for the bees? It definitely does make it easier for the bees. And what's more, it makes them easier to work. Like the bees will actually take to the plastic frames and actually work along them nicely. Or if you're using a solid frame and you're actually using foundation, well, the wax foundation that you put on the wires actually guides the bees to build directly up and down like you want, and it also sets the size of the cell nicely, so you get slightly bigger bees. I don't know if you've ever had a look at a wild hive, and the bees are slightly smaller because they naturally make little tiny bit smaller cells, whereas when we put foundation frame in, they make the cells a little bit bigger, which gives the bees a little bit more room, which makes a slightly bit bigger bee. And the theory behind that was that the bees had a little bit bigger honey tummy so they could carry some more nectar back. There's still some debate in the bee world as to whether that works or not, but that's why the bees are a little bit bigger. The second half of that comment, though, is she's answering her own question. Being that her name is Bee, that's no surprise, is it? I mean, she's actually making the point that the bees in the natural, they'll actually make wax and make a natural hive, and we don't need to worry about them. But the problem is, if you're trying to work a hive, if you just have the frames in there, well, that just is likely to work that way across the frames rather than that way if you don't put at least put a foundation strip in there, just a little piece that long, so as at least they'll build from there and be in the strips that you want. Otherwise, working your hive when the jolly things have got cross comb, it's no fun. Trust me on that. Julie and Herm have written in and said, "Hi Mark, watched you on 44. Now, if you're wondering what channel 44 is, that's a cool little TV station down here in Oz. It's a little bit, it's a little bit country, but it's all good. So if you want to go on the internet, you can actually have a rewind back to whenever it was, and we're online apparently. I'm even in the jolly, what's that called, the TV guide on the TV show. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, they're asking me the question, because there's an episode on there that I was making mead, and they're asking me, why didn't I use the screw caps on the beer bottles? Because, then you can just recycle the screw caps and wash them and get it organised. Now, the answer to that question is that I've been making beer for a long time, and so the beer bottles that I was using aren't screw caps. They're jolly old crown seals from, well, hell, probably from before Herm was born, or at least before he could drink. So back in the day, there was actually a crown seal and it was no screw caps. So, way back when I was a boy. So that was the reason why I don't use the screw caps, but I have used screw caps. But I must admit, I usually put a new crown seal on the little deCaux, and then that's a screw cap there, and I don't know whether that makes any sense. Am I making sense? No. John's shaking his head. Anyway, if you're making mead, it's not really meant to be fizzy unless you're making mead beer, so it doesn't really matter too much, but it's all good in the end anyway. It all ends up in your tummy with some alcohol and gives you a headache in the morning, so it doesn't really matter too much. And just as a footnote to the young Jill, you might be surprised to know that not only was that a fabulous drop, I won a prize. I got first prize in the bee contest up here. I got the 98%. 98% for my mead. The bloke said it was pretty amazing. He didn't know. It was a bit interesting that he said the hops were pretty cool, and I don't remember putting hops in it, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Mind you, it might have had something to do that I was the only one in the competition, but let's not worry about that. I mean, back when the kids were young, we were playing hockey, and there was 3 teams in the hockey league, and my mum and dad would ask me, how are the kids going in hockey? And I said, they're going really good. They're coming third. And they'd say, shit, that's all right. But of course, I didn't tell them that there was only 3 teams. Luke's written in and asked an interesting question that gets me thinking. He says, do you think it is a good idea to buy a flow hive on Amazon? Now, I don't know whether the flow hive boys have a site on Amazon or not. But if they don't, probably not a good option. I would suggest that you go directly to the flow hive site, and I think they've got a website where they can send flow hive frames around the planet, and they've got a pretty cool flat pack system that, but I honestly don't know, but I'd be concerned about some of the things that are on Amazon and not necessarily made by the flow hive company themselves, and there's a few knockoffs of those flow frames getting around, and they don't seem to function as good as the real thing. I think they're about half the price, but they're about half as good and all. So I'd be a bit cautious. I'd suggest you go to the flow hive website. Hell, if you're going to bite the bullet and buy a bit of furniture that happen to put bees in, well, hell, why not get the real thing? Callahan Melinda would also like to know, if I knew what I know about beekeeping now, what would I do different? If I knew what I know now about beekeeping, what would I do different? Probably run the other fucking way. No, not really. Beekeeping is amazing. I think I probably wouldn't have bought all the different sorts of hives that I bought to try and figure out what I was doing, but hell, they've all got their advantages and disadvantages. You know, it's a bit like life in general, isn't it? There's always ups and downs and ins and outs, and hell, that's how kids turn up anyway, isn't it? David's written in and he's asking a question, and what's more, he's written in and said, I'm from South Africa. Golly gosh, the bush bee man's everywhere. He's travelling around the planet. So anyway, he's asking me, is it a good time of year to start beekeeping in South Africa? Now, being that I'm in Australia, I'm not 100% sure what the weather's doing in South Africa, so I'm just going to run with, it's generally a good idea to start beekeeping sort of in the spring, because it just makes life easier. There's usually a lot more food. Middle of winter's a little bit more complicated, and what's more, bees are easier to obtain in the spring, because either you're going to get a swarm, or you could go out and buy a package or buy a nucleus hive from a neighbour. So I would suggest spring is a good time to spring into beekeeping. And Luke's written in a question and he's asking, what do I do if my queen's laying up in my super? Now, depending on how strong your hive is, I'm a bit naughty. So quite often if the queen's decided to lay up in the super because I haven't got a queen excluder, I'll go and get a queen excluder and I'll shake all the bees under the queen excluder, put the queen excluder on there, and then let the nurse bees work back up onto the eggs that are up above the excluder, and then I'll take that off, and then you've got a split. And then you've got a new hive, just like that. Boom! But if you don't want to go to all that trouble, just shake the bees downstairs, put a queen excluder on. The nurse bees will come up, they'll hatch out those eggs, and then that'll solve your problem. If you don't want to put a queen excluder on, perhaps you need to put another super on top of and then you'll have a double brood box. But hell, that's no guarantee. She still can go up further. So that's why we put queen excluders on. But if you're too stressed out about any of that, you can just work on the honey from the edges anyway, because they won't fill the whole box up with brood. So Tim's written us an email and he said that he's actually worked with some bees for a while and developed a real passion for them. He'd like to take his beekeeping skills to the next level. And he's wondering if we do tours or classes or, interactive stuff that you can come and learn. But, the fact that the bush bee man is around the entire planet, I don't know. And the fact that we have a few issues with some lockdowns and travel restrictions and I don't know what else is going on in the world. But so we've come up with an ingenious idea. we're going to bring the Bush Bee Man to you. And so we're going to actually do a training course right from getting started all the way up to when it gets complicated. So if you're interested in learning about beekeeping, and obviously you can't travel too far, hell, let's just do it interactively. And let's use the power of this internet that I didn't invent, but it's pretty bloody incredible. And we've thought long and hard about how we're going to make this happen. And we've decided there's so much, we just want to share the love of beekeeping, and we want to make sure that everybody gets the best out of their hive. And so we've decided that we're going to put it out there, and we're going to rely on the love of you people to actually support us and get onto the Patreon. And if you get real excited and give us $10, heck, then you can get on the Q&A, and you can even have a live feed, and we'll all get together and we'll have a bit of live interaction about what's going on with beekeeping, and you can ask me a question in real time. How crazy would that be? Of course, in corporate speak, we'll say we're having a soft launch next week, so keep an eye out. We're going to start the program off, and we're just going to intermingle it with what we're doing, and we're going to do a bit of teaching, a bit of laughing, a bit of loving of the bees, and hell, you never know, we might all get some honey on our toast.